shining a light on the women creating an impact, leading organizations and mission-focused strategic programs across the federal technology and consulting community. This is Impact. I'm being joined today by Monica Mack, the CEO and President of M3T Commissioning Authorities, CX Authorities. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me.
First, let's talk about what it is you do over at M3T CX Authorities.
I am the CEO and President of M3T CX Authorities. I'm also the founding member. We are a building commissioning and building science company. So what that means is, in general, building commissioning is not a very well-known term on the street, let's say. We generally represent an owner during the construction process by actually communicating and collaborating with their engineering and their construction team, and we monitor the progress and test it during the construction process, design and construction process, technically.
That seems like that would be an interesting and complicated job.
It can be. I really love it. I went to school for engineering and I had actually never heard of commissioning. My first job when I graduated was commissioning, so that's kind of how I got into it. But in general, it's a great opportunity for people that like the construction environment or the engineering environment. You get to play with gadgets and come up with scenarios and test all sorts of equipment that most people don't even get a chance to see.
Let's talk about your journey a little bit. What personal experiences have you found most rewarding in shaping your professional journey, and how have they positively influenced your leadership style?
I would say there's two things. Number one, being people. In this job, you get a chance to meet people that you would never, ever meet on a typical day, probably in your life and your surroundings. My first job was on a ship channel and was building on a shipbuilding channel. And it was lots and lots of men and myself. So you come across people, sailors, nuclear engineers, all sorts of people that aren't really prominent in your everyday life, quirky sense of humors, and they can teach you things that aren't in your everyday environment. So I would say people is one of the most influential things that have shaped my career, but also failure, not just success, but failure. And I say that because you have to have the mentality of getting up, dusting yourself off, and doing it again. A lot of times with reflection, a lot of times with, some growth involved in that. But, when you win, you win. But when you fail, sometimes you have to find a way to proceed again, or motivation to get up again, or look at it as not just a failure, but an opportunity to learn.
Failure really helps also with creating new ways to do things too.
Definitely. It definitely creates new ways to win. It helps you to grow mentally because you have to come up with new ways to do things. Maybe you can't do something in the traditional way that it is done, but are you going to lift the rock or are you going to use a pulley?
Right. That makes so much sense. What methods do you use to stay inspired and continue your growth as a leader? And how do you turn challenges into opportunities for development?
I would say having a community, a good support system is always a great thing. And not only do I use my family and friends to bounce my ideas, but I participated in Goldman Sachs 10K And I would say to meet an abundance of business owners that go through the same things that I go through in any type of business. It doesn't matter if you're laundering clothes, we go through some of the same processes. You create a community of people who understand what you're going through, regardless of what you've been through. So I would say the community and finding people that are in tune with what you're going through would be one of the ways. Going forward, I would change our challenges, bouncing those ideas off of other people who don't think like you do. I think that was one of the things I'm most grateful for, is that my COO, who is also my husband, doesn't think the way I think. And on one end, some people are like, first of all, you work with your husband.
That's a challenge in itself.
Right. It's amazing. But on the other end, it's also the fact that he doesn't think the way that I do, brings in a point of view that I don't think of. And that's reverberated 10 times over with the people that I meet. They don't think the way that you do. And there's value in that. It's value for checking yourself, for coming up with new ideas. There's value in it, in exploring pathways to go from point A to point B. The different ways, the creativity in point A to point B is what helps with the challenges and helps you, like I said, get up and get back going again. It's definitely a good position to be in when you don't have necessarily yes men, but people who have their own voice that's different from yours.
I want to touch back on something you mentioned earlier, how it was you and pretty much all men. Do you feel like that's how it is in your space? Is it continuing to be like that? Or are you
Yes,
seeing growth?
that's a very loaded question. Back when I started, not hardly anyone had heard of what I was doing.
Right.
I'd only heard of one other woman at the time, and she didn't really stay in the program, and we were entry level. I've trained a few women at that same level, and they did not wish to stay in the fields or be in the environment. No, no judgment here. I don't, there were days where I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
Mhm.
But I would say over time, there's been more women to enter this space, but not necessarily completely in leadership positions. It's still a space that's very, very segmented between men and women, and even the races at some time, ethnicities, and it's more of an exposure thing. I have to say, I think for myself, it comes across as more of an education to the general public that it even exists. So yes and no. As we push into a green and sustainable environment, our jobs become more visible to the world, even though it's been around for a very long time.
How can organizations create more supportive environments to nurture and mentor those women to become leaders?
I would say the culture comes from the top. I've been in some environments that weren't very conducive and understanding to anything that was outside the norm. And I'm not talking about necessarily a gender thing. I'm saying that anything that was outside the
Right.
norm wasn't very appreciated or respected or taken into consideration. So from the top down, there has to be a level of inclusion and a level of understanding and reflection upon who's there and how they get things done. That would be the number one thing because it gives everyone an opportunity to contribute and grow. And with that growth comes leadership.
Looking to the future, what trends and developments do you see in the workplace happening to positively shape the future of leadership?
I think especially with the younger generation, they have a different voice, and their voice is a little bit more complex and louder than ours was. It was not that the thoughts weren't there, it was that they weren't expressed in the same way. And with the expression of those thoughts, there becomes new ideas. So I think that the development going forward will be in the inclusion of the voices. Think of how many times you've seen a commercial on TV and you can tell that a segment that they were going after wasn't created by the people who understood that marketing segment.
Right.
So it may have come off as insensitive or sexist or even ageist. It's like that insurance commercial where the people are talking about, do they think that all seniors go to farmers markets?
I know, right?
That's amazing. Or the is it progressive commercials with you're turning into your parents? I love those. But it's just those little things where like I said, in the future, because the younger kids coming up have different voices and they express them in very different ways and they're very vocal and forward and want to share it with everyone, whether you
Yes.
want to hear it or not.
I
But
hear that.
but there's some appreciation in that too, because it is an opportunity to listen. And that's going to be a big part of leadership is listening to the people and not just hearing what they say, but taking it at face value and deeper. So you understand what's coming in the future and how to deal with it, how to make everyone be seen and understood, how to help them develop into the leaders. Because the truth is, it's a decision that you make. I made the decision to go into business because I wasn't heard. I had a couple of people who actually made the push and actually, nominated me to be a part of a big project that my current employer at that time to be a part of. But I had to make the decision to go to another company, step out on my own, stay where I was. And ultimately, the feeling that even if I went to another company, I had done that before and still never had been heard. Going in and creating an opportunity to be heard in a loud way, in a position of authority, because I was already doing the work. Creating that for myself was the reason I asked some friends and family to hey, let's take this into consideration and build something ourselves.
I love that answer. So Monica, I want to congratulate you on being an Impact Women in Leadership Award winner. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being nominated for something of that sort. Sometimes I do shrek into the background, kind of shrink. And I think that comes from the days of being the only girl on that shipyard. But understanding though that sometimes people need to see you to see themselves. Sometimes you need to step up and say, hey, we exist. Hey, we're out here. And it gives another young lady an opportunity to say, oh, I need to be heard. Maybe I should try that path.
I agree. Monica, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
No problem at all. Anytime you need me, I am here.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you're keeping up to date on the latest episodes and learn more at govforum.io.